When you care about something, you work for it. When you believe in something, you fight for it. And most of all, when you start something, you never give up.
Pierre Poilievre making his pitch to Conservatives for keeping him as leader. I'm Catherine Cullen. This is a special edition of The House from Calgary. We're at the Conservative Party convention where party members have weighed in on Poilievre's political future. We've got journalists with us to break down the result and his next steps. The Conservatives' new campaign manager. How does he plan to deal with voters who think Poilievre is just too combative? And party insiders on whether MAGA's influence is something Canada's Conservatives need to worry about. But we begin with the Conservative verdict on Poilievre's leadership. The House in Calgary is now in session. Okay, let's get to it. 87.4% of Conservative delegates voted to support Pierre Poilievre's leadership. What does that number tell us, and where do Poilievre and the party go now? It is the wee hours of early Saturday morning as we are recording here on the convention floor, and I am very appreciative of my next two guests being up with me. Stephanie Levitz is a senior politics reporter for the Globe and Mail. JP Tasker is a senior reporter in the CBC's Parliamentary Bureau. Thank you both so much for doing this.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Steph, what do we make of this result?
It definitely reaffirms that this is Mr. Poilievre's party, that they remain squarely in his corner despite the ups and downs of the last election, despite the fact that they lost the last election. And, you know, in the aftermath of Mr. Poilievre giving a rousing address to the delegates and reminding them perhaps of the things that they believe in, the things that they will continue to fight for, they obviously took that message and went into the voting room and delivered, you know, a yes, please stay as our leader.
JP, Pierre Poilievre put a lot of effort into trying to get this result tonight. He was traveling the country. Does this quiet the naysayers?
I think it does. I think it's such a definitive result. There is no gray area here, and he has cleared the benchmark that was set by Stephen Harper back in 2005 when he was subjected to a leadership review. And I think that really there are no remaining hurdles for him, at least at the party level. But we can obviously talk about caucus.
Yes.
You know, just because he's got the base on his side doesn't mean that all MPs are necessarily lining up behind him and there could be more floor crossings.
Well,
that was the pervasive fear of some of the people I spoke to, frankly, here on the convention floor today, that the leadership review might be all right for him, but are there still some stragglers, still some Conservative MPs that are thinking of going over to the Liberals? That could be a potentially devastating development for him. So good night here. What about back in Ottawa?
Also worth noting, this is a caucus that employs the Reform Act. If there was enough discontent in caucus, they could kick him out. But given, this healthy number from the party, that's not likely to happen anytime soon. The members have spoken. But let's talk a bit about Pierre Poilievre speaking, Steph. He gave this speech. We heard a lot of familiar ground, but there were some new remarks as well. What did you find most significant?
A couple of pieces. One, he has abandoned, it seems, at least for now, all of the sloganeering, all of the rhyming, all of the limericks and the haikus and the political poetry that he used to deploy.
I wouldn't mind a haiku, to be honest with you. I want to hear what that sounds like.
Yeah, exactly that. But just that all of that political poetry that really characterized a lot of his campaigning and his electioneering in months past was gone from this speech. The other thing that struck me is, in as much as we heard a lot of the same laugh lines that he's been delivering in some cases for 3 or 4 years, he did speak to the moment in time to a degree, right? He did address separatism and the separatist sentiment in Alberta and Quebec. He spoke to that directly. He blamed the Liberals for it, offered some hope, which is his new mantra, right? His new message, I'm going to offer hope. So he spoke about national unity. He addressed substantively for him the U.S. tariffs and the geopolitical upheaval being caused by U.S. President Donald Trump, although he did not mention Donald Trump by name. And in so doing, I think, was really trying to respond to a criticism of him repeatedly in recent months, is that we need, his critics will say, to see Pierre Poilievre the Prime Minister, not Pierre Poilievre the opposition leader. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways, I think, in a visual sense, we really saw that tonight was when he came out onto the floor of this convention. during the election, he would often come out in these campaign rallies with like all of this energy around him. Like think about like a UFC fight night. It was really aggressive and dominant. This time he walks out slowly. He walks out in a dark suit. There are people, lining the pathway, but it's not that raucous crowd. It was just a bit toned down. And it gave a sense that he was trying to project like a more steady presence in the crowd as opposed to the, fighter guy that people are a little bit more used to.
What about you, JP?
I think Poilievre was more jovial, too, a little more joyful. There wasn't that angry side that we are so used to seeing from him.
Kind of Canada is broken of yesterday.
Yeah, and the guy who made his political name saying Canada is broken, I thought was more patriotic tonight, perhaps, invoking national pride at different moments throughout the speech than I've heard him in the past, kind of invoking, building the Canadian Pacific Railroad, talking about the struggles of the soldiers in the trenches in the First World War, and equating kind of the struggles of the past with his own challenges in what he's had to deal with over the last year, including within the party itself. Obviously, those two departures and that one abrupt resignation. I think that's interesting to me, that he's drawing a parallel between the country's story and his own. I think, to Steph's point, that we are not necessarily going to see a huge shift in terms of what policies he's putting in the window. He also said at one point today, we're not going to listen to the pundit class. We're not going to listen to the commentariat, right?
I think that one he's been saying for a while.
Well, but he said we're going to stick to our conservative principles. People might tell us we need to change, but that's not where there's going to be change for Mr. Poilievre. I think it's going to be a little more hopeful. It's going to be a little more happy talk. I think that he's going to try and engage people in a way that's perhaps a little more friendly than he has been.
Steph, I want to come back to this question of Albertan separatism. You raised it. It's been in the news a lot this week. And Poilievre, it was interesting the way he set this up. He asked why youth in Quebec and Alberta, why so many of them, in his view, have lost hope in Confederation. And as you say, he blamed the Liberals. Let's listen.
For the last 10 years, Ottawa has told our young people that our history is filled with shame and horror, that we are a post-national country with no core identity, and that our youth will never own homes. But other than that, they should feel great about being united in Canada. All the while, the federal government stomps on Alberta's energy sector and Quebec's jurisdiction.
Steph, what do you make of that?
He had no choice but to address it, right? And one of the things that definitely struck me over the past week is that you had Prime Minister Mark Carney convene a meeting with the premiers of the country where they each spoke about separatism in a different way. But what you absolutely had was that image of all of the premiers lined up, and you had Mr. Carney right at the center of it, trying to be Captain Canada. And for Canadians, if we are truly going to be headed into a national unity crisis of significance, which we very well may be, the next ballot box question may be a national unity question, and Mr. Poilievre is going to be pressed to address it. Where it gets tricky for him, because things always seem to end up tricky for him, and the base of this party is that the Alberta separatist movement and some elements of the conservative CAPC are intertwined a little bit. And so he needs to speak to those sentiments. He needs to probably watch and learn a bit from Danielle Smith as she tries to grapple with it. But he absolutely could not avoid referencing it in the speech, considering we are, in fact, in Calgary.
JP, one of the other big things Pierre Poilievre has to grapple with is this question of Donald Trump. He didn't, as we said, get referenced by name. Jason Kenney, former Alberta Premier, Harper Cabinet Minister, was talking to our colleagues on CBC News Network, and he said there should have been more Trump in this speech. What do you think of that?
Well, and he faced so much criticism internally during the last federal election campaign for kind of ignoring this issue entirely or only speaking to it, around the edges. And I think it speaks to the fact that he's reluctant to make this a central part of his policy platform, of his leadership, right? He doesn't feel like it's a really particularly strong issue for him. I think he thinks that this is kind of liberal territory to go on about Trump and the trade war with the United States. He is not someone who wants to necessarily engage on this at length. He did call the tariffs unfair. He did talk about how Canada cannot bow to any other nation, so he did sort of reference some of the struggles that we're going through with the U.S., but he wants to focus on the issues that he thinks his voters care most about, his anxious voters, right? Cost of living, crime, immigration, those are the things that he wants to put in the window. He doesn't want to keep going back to this Trump thing. He wants to leave that for someone else.
Okay, Steph, looking forward, what does the future look like for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives now?
So, I mean, now that they have this leadership review behind them, like as we've talked about, they've been working flat out for months to make sure they had it in the bag, right? So now it becomes, the next campaign, right? The next campaign is the next federal campaign. And figuring out what the ballot box question is going to be. For Steve Outhouse, the new campaign manager, to figure out how do they reach more voters? How do they make some of the changes that delegates have been agitating for, on the floor? And, as JP alluded to, yes, 87.4% of the delegates on the floor. If you held that same vote in his caucus today, would he get 87.4%? It's impossible to know. He is going to have to work to keep those MPs on side, to keep them engaged, to keep them working and busy. It is going to be a challenging time for them. It is hard to get ahead of Mark Carney. We are in a very reactive news cycle. So he's going to have to figure out a way to break through. This is the largest stage he's had in months. We'll see where it takes him.
JP, very quick final thought.
Poilievre also has to think about a path back to victory, a path to government, and that might include broadening the coalition and speaking out to voters who are not necessarily on side with him tonight, beyond the party base.
Thank you both so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The CBC's JP Tasker and the Globe and Mail's Stephanie Levitz. Lots more coming up on the House podcast, including the Conservative campaign manager. Does he think we're headed to a spring election? And a pollster on why some voters like the Conservative Party better than its leader. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to a special edition of The House, coming to you from the Conservative Party's National Convention in Calgary. You can always tell us what you think of the show. Send us an email, thehouse@cbc.ca. There are lots of people here who are passionate about where the party is headed. I spoke to several Conservative Party members from across the country about why they're Conservatives and what direction they want the party to take.
I'm Tammy Troush from Victoria, BC.
And I'm Candice Chalky from Victoria, BC.
We have a big reason.
We have a really big reason.
That started us getting involved with our EDA, and that was our brother died from a drug overdose. So that's what got our attention with the Conservative Party, and Pierre Poilievre was the first person in a position of power that I heard say, this is not acceptable, and we are going to do something. So that's where it started, and that was the first piece of the puzzle. Everything else aligned once we started listening to him with the affordability talk. In Canada, I'm a single mom, raising 2 kids, barely making it, and I have a good paying job.
I've been following the Conservative Party for years. We live in Victoria, so it's a really tough area to be a Conservative in. You almost don't want to go out in public and have anybody know. You've got to be quiet about it, secret.
What is it you're worried about?
There are verbal attacks, there are looks, it is literally almost dangerous to walk around in Victoria and have anybody know that you are Conservative. You couldn't say anything. I work in an office of about 40 people. You have to whisper if you're talking to coworkers.
That is the problem, though, because the hostility is coming from a fear factor that has to do with the United States and Donald Trump. So when people see that you're supporting the Conservative Party, they're buying the story that the Conservatives are aligned with Donald Trump and the United States. And I really do think that is the biggest issue that we're going to have to figure out how to address and get on top of. It's not going away.
So that's a perfect sort of question to close off with, which is what, going forward, obviously the party saw new voters coming to it in the last election, but what do you think the Conservative Party needs to do to tip over the edge and form government? Yeah.
I think we need to separate the Conservative Party from the U.S. Republicans. We're not the same party. We have a lot of different policies than the Republicans, and I think that needs to be really clear to people that aren't sure if they want to, those swing voters, who they're going to support. I think that needs to be clear how we're different. And I think, I do think Pierre Poilievre is doing an amazing job talking about cost of living, all the things that really matter. I think we need to talk to the Canadian public about what the solutions are that the Conservatives are going to bring to the table.
I think
my name's Darren Hayward. I'm from Brockville, Ontario, just about an hour outside of Ottawa. I think we need to stop abandoning more of our values for votes. I think there's a lot of topics, especially more controversial topics, that we avoid talking about simply because we know we are not going to get in on that platform.
Like what?
Things like abortion is a huge one. We have the reform wing of the party, right, who I would say is pretty well against it, but they're not going to say that because they're not going to get in on that, and I think that's honestly, I think it's cowardly, and I don't think it's representing the people that they should.
I just want to be clear.
Sure, yeah.
So what you're saying is you want the people within the Conservative Party who want to stop abortion access to be more concrete about that?
Not
or
specifically on that issue. It's just I think there are a lot of cultural issues that we're not addressing simply because we're trying to battle the Liberals in the polls, right? So a lot of those things are things that get pushed aside simply because we're trying to get power, and I don't think that's right. I'll flat out say I support Pierre. I'm going to be voting yes, but I would like there to at least be a conversation about it. As I said, I think he's our best option right now, but I think going forward with our new generation turning more conservative, I think on both sides, I think more becoming a little bit more polarized on certain issues. Those are things that, if not voiced now, will become an issue in the future.
So my name is Amardeep Singh. I'm from Brampton East. We are from Ontario. And, the way we are being seen over there, especially in Brampton, and also in Surrey, the extortions, there's so much crime going on. What we believe is, they're playing politics. Nobody's hearing the voice of extortions happening in Surrey, in Brampton, and all this stuff. So that is the biggest issue that we have.
in terms of tipping the scale, the Conservative Party was talking about affordability and crime a lot in the last election. What do you think the party needs to go the extra mile?
What I can say, we might have missed conveying our message. Our message was not conveyed to all the Canadians. A lot of seniors were very undecided. There's a lot of undecided voters who didn't came out and vote for Conservatives. So there is a support for the party. It just, what we feel is like we just need to have more people who can touch the ethnic media, you know, and we just want like more ethnic media to be informed, and we just want our people to be better informed. That's what we want.
I'm Rob Batherson. I'm a delegate from Halifax West. I'm the former president of the Conservative Party of Canada. I was a candidate in Halifax West in the last general election, and this is my 16th national convention for the PC Party of Canada and Conservative Party of Canada since 1993.
What has changed? Like where the Conservative Party is headed now versus when you started. What is the thing that stands out to you?
Well, for this convention, it's the new energy from New Conservatives. So for the first time that I can remember, Halifax West is sending a slate of 12 delegates. I am the only one of that 12 who has ever attended a national convention before. So this is a new generation of Conservatives of all different ages and backgrounds who were inspired to get involved in the party because of Pierre Poilievre's leadership. So that's something that I'm watching for. I'm not saying that my home electoral district out of 343 is representative of the entire party, but I think talking to delegates, you see that new energy coming through, and it's driven by Pierre's leadership.
What does your party have to do to appeal to a broad enough swath of Canadians, something it wasn't already doing?
We have to do a better job appealing to older voters. There's no two ways about that. And so the new Conservative coalition is younger, more diverse, blue-collar, but particularly in Atlantic Canada, the demographics are clear. You can look them up on the StatsCan website. We have an older demographic than the rest of the country, and there are lots of traditional Conservative voters who embraced Mark Carney in the last election, and we've got to work hard to get them back.
Those were the voices of some Conservatives who've traveled here to Calgary for this convention. But the party has a challenge. Poilievre is popular with members, but a lot of Canadians are put off by him too. Can the Conservatives overcome that challenge to form government? Pollster David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data. We spoke with him just as the convention was getting set up. David, welcome back to the House.
Thanks for having me, Catherine. How are you doing?
Good, and you, I know, have been busy because over the past few weeks you've been running a polling series focused on Poilievre and the Conservatives. On the one hand, the Conservatives delivered the party's best showing in more than a decade in the last election. It wasn't enough. So what does your research show about how much room Pierre Poilievre has to expand the number of people ready to vote for him?
Well, our estimate is that there's about 14% of Canadians who say they are open to voting Conservative, but right now wouldn't if an election were held today. So that's a sizable number. You don't even need all of them, I think, if you're the Conservatives, and you can hold those that voted for you in the past and add even a few points of that, and you're maybe close to a place where you can win. So it's possible. The problem or the challenge is that among that group, public opinion, views of the world, issues, perceptions of Mr. Poilievre are very different than those who are currently supporting the party. And it does signal there are some who could be easily persuaded, but many of them, I think, would be hesitant. And perhaps the most important fact about that group is they overwhelmingly right now like Mark Carney. And so everything is in comparison to that when it comes to Mr. Poilievre's ability to attract them into the party.
Often when we talk about the story of the Conservatives right now, there's this idea that their floor is pretty high, they have a pretty solid base, but the ceiling is pretty low. There is a challenge in terms of how far they can grow. For the people who are struggling with Pierre Poilievre as an option, as the leader, but not necessarily the Conservative Party, what do we know about what it is they're struggling with?
Well, they tell us when we ask them, what is it about Mr. Poilievre that you don't particularly like or you find off-putting? They see him as more confrontational than I think they think is necessary. They'd like to see him be more constructive. Some fundamentally disagree with his policies, and they'd likely disagree with any Conservative leader because they're not particularly conservative. But for others who say, look, I like his ideas, I just don't really like his personality. And many describe him as being a lot like Donald Trump. And so those pieces together demonstrate the context in which I think a lot of people who aren't within the Conservative universe are looking at not just Mr. Poilievre in isolation, but him in relative terms to what are the top issues they think about. A lot of them are saying, look, Trump is my source of anxiety. And two, if the question they are looking to answer when it comes to their political preference is who's best to deal with him, right now Mark Carney is easily winning that. And so it is very much a mix of personality, policy, and context that I think is a barrier to deepening or building a relationship between those swing voters and Mr. Poilievre right now.
You wrote a piece for the conservative-leaning media outlet The Hub, which I've had a few Conservatives mention to me as an interesting potential path forward for Mr. Poilievre. And essentially, you argue he should lean into impatience. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could explain that to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I always think about, even I do a lot of market research, and so when you're trying to market a product or a service, like in politics, you need distinction. You need to be different than the competition. And so in the current market, if we think of politics as that way, Mark Carney has carved out and owns the reassuring stability, long-term plan to get the country back on track. But there are many Canadians who tell us, look, I can't wait 5 to 10 years for Mark Carney's plan to work. I can't buy a home now. I can't feed my family now. I'm worried about losing my job now. And so when I look at a way of positioning Pierre Poilievre, like what is the thing that, again, voters might answer when assessing who should lead us, who's for me, I do think this sense of urgency or impatience that he can reflect might find a broader audience, right? It's certainly a driving force, I think, in a lot of the current Conservative supporters who are not happy with the speed at which a new pipeline might be built or the time it's taking to solve the affordability issues that many people are feeling. And so maybe instead of making it ideological, Pierre Poilievre can better tap into that emotional need for results today, not what I think Mark Carney is basically telling people is it's going to take some time for my plan to bear some fruit.
Leadership aside, what do you think is the most challenging question facing the Conservative Party whenever the next election might be?
Look, I think it's fundamentally the question that the Conservative Party has faced for its entire history, particularly since it merged together the Canadian Alliance and the Progressive Conservative parties back in 2003. And that is, how do you at once satisfy the base while also appealing to a broader coalition, and especially in an environment where you're not up against a deeply unpopular prime minister. Now, that doesn't mean a year from now Mark Carney won't be riding high like he is right now. But if we have an election this spring, whether it's with Mr. Poilievre as leader or somebody else, the party will be facing a relatively popular primary opponent, and you have to operate in a different way than when you're up against a prime minister that only 12% of Canadians think deserves to be reelected. And that was the case facing Justin Trudeau at the end of 2024.
It's definitely a whole new ball game now. David Coletto, thank you for taking the time to walk us through your research.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data. The man trying to figure out how to conquer some of the challenges we just heard about is Steve Outhouse. He's the party's campaign manager. This is one of the first interviews he's done since taking the job. We spoke earlier. Hi, Steve. Thanks for coming on the house.
Hey, Catherine. Nice to be here.
So you spend a lot of time thinking about the next election. How likely do you think it is we're heading to the polls in the next few months?
Yeah, obviously the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party have not discussed with me my thoughts or feelings. Open to the call. But I would put it a bit high probability at this point in time. I mean, I think there's certainly things that are tempting for the government to try to do that. We'll be prepared and ready to go, whatever the scenario. But if it's obviously just a guess. But I would say right now they're looking to do that.
I know we've seen the Conservatives offering more cooperation in recent weeks, which it may have other effects, but part of it is that it says, well, you can't say you're calling an election because Parliament isn't working. Look, we're trying to work together. How much pushback would there be if the Liberals started insisting that there was a need for an election?
Well, I think on a couple fronts, I mean, it would be a little bit of a challenge, and again, it's up for them to decide. But I mean, I think there would be a public challenge because if you say you're trying to seek a mandate to deal with President Trump, the Liberals quite graciously did a lot of victory laps after the last election, saying that they got their mandate to deal with Trump, and that's why they were elected. So that would be a communications challenge there. I think the other thing that's appealing to the Liberals and why they would want to go early is that there's no results to hold them to account on yet. They're still in a little bit of a honeymoon period, obviously. They have not really accomplished much of what they set out to do. Mr. Carney did very well in the last election, sort of having the aspirations of a nation put on him and put on his shoulders, hope that what he would do. And he can say at this point in time, I'm working on those things, but now I need a stronger mandate to do that. I think there's some risk in that, but ultimately that's politics, and we'll see what they do.
We will, indeed. In the meantime, you're thinking about what you're going to do to deal with that. We just heard from David Coletto about the challenge the party faces, where Mr. Poilievre, you know this well, very well liked by Conservative voters, the base, but also this large swath of voters who are put off by his combative nature. How do you go about addressing that challenge? Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. I mean, first of all, I think a lot of our leaders maybe are not the warmest and fuzziest and, who've been successful in this line of work. I mean, you need someone who's a fighter. You need someone who gets in there to go to bat on different issues. I do think that we can show more, facets of Mr. Poilievre's personality. He is a funny individual, with a sense of humor, meaning, and he is just to clarify that, boss, and sense of humor. First and last broadcast interview. This was wonderful. Thanks for having me. He's a family man, and I think there is more to him than what is often just shown in QP clips. So, and when he gets out there on the road and connects with people, I think that goes really well. There is, so I think we can look to do that. But I don't think you can underestimate the importance of staying focused on the issues that matter to Canadians. Now 11 years deep into this government, things are more expensive, housing's a real challenge, crime is on the rise. There are a lot of things that really affect people's day-to-day lives, and we're not going to shy away from sharing those or shying away from those issues in total. So I do think when you continue to focus on what matters to Canadians,
I think that is a way that people say, look, whether I, completely think I'm going to go, have vacation with this individual or coffee with this person, they are focused on fighting for me, and they're focused on making my cost of living lower. They want younger people. This person wants to have younger people being able to afford homes, and those things matter.
There's this question of how he responds to the message that voters gave him from the last election, where, yes, Mr. Poilievre has pointed out many times, a growth in support, but of course not enough to get him over the top. Do you think it's important that Mr. Poilievre show that he's changed since the last election?
Well, I think that there's different ways of looking at that, and I think, what our opponents would like us to do when it comes to change, I think, is that they want to describe that as just a wholesale flip around, an inauthentic version of oneself where, all of a sudden you're acting a different way and talking about different issues. They can't be comfortable with that outcome in the last election. I mean, obviously it was a tremendous, comeback that they had. I'm not diminishing that at all from a campaigner perspective. It was obviously significant. But they want to drive us off track, and they want us to change and start to look at different things and behave differently. Voters pick up inauthenticity more than I think they will pick up on anything else. And if you try to tell a leader to be something that they are not, I don't think that works. So again, I think, understanding that Mr. Poilievre is a fighter and, fighting for things that matter, and finding, perhaps different ways to communicate and making sure that we have a more tailored message that is landing with different, age groups and cohorts. There are things like that we can do, like that's change, in and of itself. But, we're not going to give up the fight for Canada. We're not going to give up the fight for affordability. And, that is a thing that I think our opponents want us to do when they talk about change.
Another interesting element that I imagine you are considering is this question of the NDP. Because, of course, the collapse of their vote in the last election unquestionably hurt you folks. They're still in a leadership race right now. We don't know whether they'll come roaring back or not. What can you do so that your party's fate isn't so tied to the abilities of the NDP? Yeah,
I think that's the question that came out of the last election is, are we now in effectively a two-party system? And I don't know if anyone really knows the answer to that point in time. I've seen things written on all sides of that issue. So we do need to take matters into our own hands in that, and we have to be, going into this campaign looking to see if that scenario holds. We have to continue to try to win over new voters, to get first-time voters into the polling stations, and speaking to ways to get more people engaged, and also win back some of our vote that bled over to Mr. Carney the last time around due to circumstances and so on. So, from our perspective, we are not going to build a strategy that's going to be dependent on the NDP doing this, that, or the other thing. We're going to go out there and go for the win, based on our strengths.
Let's zoom in on Alberta, because you worked on the last provincial campaign with Danielle Smith. Does the enthusiasm we are seeing from her right now for working with Mark Carney make things challenging for the Conservative message when she's saying, look, he's getting stuff done?
And we're saying we hope that it's going to get done. We want to see pipelines. We're certainly a party, and our membership, if you poll this room right now, you're going to have strong support for pipelines. The concern that we had when the MOU came out is it actually going to happen? And I think that's a fair question, and that's part of the reason I also think Mr. Carney would like to go before July, is because that way there's no accountability, and he can tell one group within his caucus and his candidates in BC, well, don't worry about that yet.
I hear you, but I think
sure.
Fundamentally that question of her looking so buddy-buddy with him, surely that's still sort of sticking your teeth a little?
No, not for me. I've worked and now helped a couple different governments get elected. I understand they have a job to do. They have to work for their citizens first and foremost, and they have to get things done. So I believe that what the Premier's done is worked with the federal government. There's now this MOU in place. And now we'll get to, as opposition in this situation, get to see and hold them to account to make sure it actually happens.
You mentioned the work you've done on provincial campaigns, Alberta, Newfoundland, New Brunswick. You're going to the Progressive Conservative meeting in Nova Scotia in February. Are you trying to rebuild or build some bridges with provincial parties? Because we heard in the news, Ontario, Nova Scotia in particular, things were feeling a little bit rocky last time around.
Yeah. So Nova Scotia is my home province, and I'm pleased to go back to the PC AGM. But yes, absolutely. I'm looking to build relationships all across the Conservative coalition, across the country.
To help the Conservative Party in ways it wasn't helping itself last time?
Yeah, I wasn't involved, kind of the last time in that way, so I can't really speak to all the ins and outs of that. I mean, all I can speak to is how I would like to run the campaign this time around. Is that I think we have a tremendous network of Conservatives across the country. Some of them are PCs, some of them are in the UCP, some of them are BC Conservatives, etc. So Sask Party, I mean, there's all different brands kind of across the country, and we need the strength of each of those parts of the coalition for us, especially if we're looking at a potentially two-party system election. We need everyone working alongside each other.
The biggest factor, last question, the biggest factor in the last election was something very much out of your control, Donald Trump. How do you plan for that?
Yeah. Well, that is definitely a very complex and ever-evolving situation. And so I think that we're going to be... I don't have an answer for you at this point in time. I'll be honest, and I think this is the thing where we have a leader who understands how important it is to work with our neighbors to the south. I mean, it's such a integrated part of our economy, and we all want to see that. I think most Canadians want to see that maintained. The president and of himself, I mean, we are truly in a scenario where you can wake up at any day and just something new, happens. And that's difficult to plan for sure, but we'll be ready.
Steve Outhouse, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks, Catherine. Take care.
Conservative campaign manager Steve Outhouse. While we've been here in Calgary, the national conversation about Albertan sovereignty has been heating up.
In my opinion, that is treasonous activity, and it needs to be called out. It needs to be stopped. Now, I'm not talking about debates that we have inside the country, among Canadians about how we order ourselves, our relationships between the federal government and the provinces, referenda that might be held. I'm talking about crossing the border, soliciting the assistance of a foreign government to break up this country, and I don't think we should stand for it.
That's BC Premier David Eby responding to news that Albertan separatists met with members of the Trump administration. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith took a different tone, talking about the separatist movement more broadly.
That's about 1 million people, and I'm not going to demonize or marginalize a million of my fellow citizens when they've got legitimate grievances. What we need to do is we need to give Albertans hope. We need to show them, not just tell them, not just words, but with actions that Canada can work.
How much of a challenge does Albertan separatism hold for the federal Conservatives? What about managing the effects of the MAGA movement? Ed Woodfinden is a senior advisor at Meredith Bosencool & Phillips and the former director of communications for Pierre Poilievre. Erica Baroudis is a Conservative commentator and former principal secretary to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Thank you both for joining me. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Erica, I want to start with you. Next week in Ottawa, Conservatives are going to be marking 20 years since Stephen Harper first formed government. How significantly do you think the Conservative Party has changed in those 20 years?
Well, I love that we're starting off the podcast dating me because I've been around that long. And I'll actually be out there for some events in Ottawa. But to be honest, when it comes down to the Conservatives and values and beliefs that I've started in politics with and where we are now, not much has really changed. I'd say the way we communicate in politics and the way that we maybe campaign from a digital standpoint is different. But when you bring it down to why I got involved over 20 years ago and why I'm still involved, nothing, the values haven't changed.
Ben, for a long time when we talked about the split or the factions in the Conservative tent, Progressive Conservatives and Reform, the two groups that came together to form the modern Conservative Party, you have argued, though, that the split at this moment is a different one. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think that it maps a broader split in this country that I think, and this maps onto kind of the Liberal coalition and the Conservative coalition. I think there's a large group of people for whom kind of status quo, the country works for them. It works pretty well. They tend to be older. They tend to own homes. And then there's an increasingly large segment of the population that it doesn't work for. I call it the people that are locked out, the coalition's locked out. And I think that's a broader kind of split. But I think that split, there's also a microcosm of that within the kind of Conservative movement where I'm too young to. The PC reform split is just before my time. I don't think in those terms, but
I don't think he's like throwing shots at you there.
No, I was going to say, I'm like, clarify that.
But I think that split. I think it is largely a generational split within the kind of conservative movement, where I think the people that so much of the criticism of Poilievre, for example, is his tone. He's too mean. He's too nasty. And I think the people that it's almost a luxury to care about that, because if you're someone who's been locked out of the housing market, you feel this country doesn't work for you, you probably want someone that channels that kind of frustration. So the people that tend to talk the most about kind of temperament and tone and style with someone like Poilievre, I think they do tend to be older, and I think it maps onto that kind of split. And I don't think it's that fractious, but I do think, and you see in this room, there's a lot of young people here. And I think part of what Poilievre has done is bring these young people in, but I think he's tapped into this kind of broader divide in this country.
Erica, one of the other conversations that we're certainly having a lot of on this episode is about divides within the country. Mm-hmm. Here in Alberta, part of the way that Premier Danielle Smith has tried to appeal to some of the more right-wing parts of her faction is by making it easier to hold referendums. This seems to have put us on a collision course with a vote on Albertan separation. Some people are afraid that's a bit of a Pandora's box. Did she make life harder for federal Conservatives by opening up this issue to this extent?
I mean, if federal Conservatives don't like democracy, then maybe that's the conversation. But in all fairness, I think that it was a conversation that was being screamed by Alberta to Ottawa for decades. And so if a referendum does come forward, I think it's actually giving the people that have been screaming and may continue to scream regardless, but give that opportunity for this issue to be addressed and then either put to bed or addressed.
But is it a challenge for the Conservative Party, who might find some of their supporters interested in this movement and others sort of virulently opposed?
I don't think so, and I would say because the Conservative Party of Canada has done a good job of managing that through Quebec. I mean, when we look at the conversation, I find it kind of surprising because we could actually have a Quebec referendum next year, and we're seeing that they have a party about separation, and they have actually been very close. We're talking about 30-ish%. More about getting the message across that Alberta and Western Canada, or the prairies, should be listened to and respected in Confederation. So I think as a big tent Conservative Party, Stephen Harper did a great job of it. I've seen Pierre Poilievre, especially being now an Alberta MP, finding the balance of listening to Alberta on their concerns without actually having to get into the weeds of the separation conversation.
Okay. Ben, you were in the Conservative campaign office, the so-called war room, during the last election. Mm-hmm. You've got some unique insights into how much of a challenge Donald Trump's presence is for the federal Conservatives. Again, when we talk about the fact that this is a party that is a big tent and it has people with different views, it tries to keep them all together. A portion, though a minority of the Conservative base, supports Trump. Is that part of the problem for the Conservatives?
No, I don't think the kind of a portion of the base supporting Trump is the issue. I think that the broader kind of, it's a challenging issue. It's a challenging environment. I think it's true actually for just all opposition parties, but it's especially challenging for Conservatives because, look, Trump poisons Conservatives elsewhere, I think is the way I'd put it, and everything that he seems to kind of touch, it goes down. It happened to us federally that Trump changed their election, and I ultimately think it changed the outcome. It happened in Australia too. It's happening in Denmark right now. We may be the first place this happened, and we were the earliest place. But during the campaign, it was you could literally track when we had been riding high in the polls for a long time, and it was because Pierre had been relentlessly focused on the kind of domestic housing, crime, cost of living, inflation, this kind of stuff. And it's not that those issues went anywhere and that we stopped talking about them, but Trump just kind of, and all the threats just sucks the oxygen out of everything, right? It's like a black hole that just pulls everything else in. And I think, look, it changes in the vote, and it changed undoubtedly in some voters' minds that people that maybe were more eager for change a year ago were kind of seeking stability and nothing that's something that would preserve a status quo. And it's an environment that's hard to operate in for any opposition party. I think right now, I think it's true in the provincial Ontario election, which happened around the same time. But
just because people want stability, they want to stick with what they know.
Well, and look, I think people want to be able to see a kind of. I don't think 2 years ago voters would have cared that much about kind of how a leader looks on the world stage, kind of thing. I think that matters now, and I think that still matters for voters. But I do think that, incumbents have an immense advantage there, regardless of political stripe, where they just, if you want to be having a prime minister's podium in front of you, just makes you look more like a prime minister, right? It's just a hard fact of opposition right now.
Erica, Ben was saying, Trump sort of poisoning things for conservative parties. Here in Canada, we know that over the years there's a lot of cultural influence from the United States that includes on our politics. When you see what's happening in the MAGA movement, I'm thinking particularly the kind of overt white supremacy and anti-Semitism of a Nick Fuentes becoming more and more mainstream in the MAGA movement specifically. How do you keep that from infecting conservative politics in this country?
Well, I think we need to remind ourselves that there's an ideological spectrum, and then there are political parties. And if you actually break down where the Conservative Party of Canada, or all of our parties, it is not Democrat, Republican. Those are far, more on the fringe of each side than what we have in our country, where it's more of a concerted effort closer to the middle when you look at the dynamics and even how the ideologies break up. And so I think comparing it is like apples to oranges to some degree. And I would say a lot of that fear-mongering does come from the left on saying that Pierre equals Trump, which is very different. And so when it comes to those issues, I mean, look at the caucus, look at who represent them, look at who our leader is married to. There is so much diversity, and instead of groupthink, there is that conversation that can happen, and we see it by who is representing the Conservative Party across Canada as well as the membership. So I think it's not really a conversation where you can compare the two.
Ben, when you look to the party's future, what do you think is the biggest question that still needs to be answered for the Conservative Party of Canada?
That's a big question. Look, I think and you've heard this a lot in the room this weekend already. I think there's lots to be proud of that the Conservatives did at the last election. The biggest share of the vote since Brian Mulroney, most votes ever for all that. It's all true. And I think Poilievre's built a pretty durable coalition. I think it's holding together. It seems to be holding together. And it's a very different coalition from, I think, to go back to what we were talking about before, it's not that conservatism's changed, but the people who it speaks to it has changed, I think, somewhat. And that coalition looks quite different. But I think ultimately the biggest challenge is, my goal, like every Conservative should be, is to ultimately win, ultimately to get into government, get us into government at some point. And as much as we did well, it wasn't enough, right? And we need more. And where those extra votes come from, how you do that, I think these are the big kind of pressing electoral questions. But then ultimately, I think in many ways the Conservative, the people it speaks to now, it's a message of change, right? And I know that you would naturally associate Conservatives with being the party of change, but I think when something's gone wrong, you have to fix it, right? And I think the Conservatives are going to keep speaking to that. I don't think Poilievre's going anywhere, and I don't think he's going to stop trying to fight for those people. And because he's a tribune for these people. So I think figuring out how to get over the finish line is probably the big question.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Ben Woodfidden and Erica Barudis. Okay, that is it for us this week from Calgary. Our crew on the house is Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and our senior producer this week is Kristen Everson. Technical production by Miguel Plant. Thanks also to Gabriel Marino. I'm Catherine Cullen, and thank you so much for listening.